This is a theological issue. As God's heart for the world becomes one of his attributes that can be talked about in isolation from others, then this is a logical consequence of that. That missions becomes another thing to talk about, not the central thing to talk about.
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of his mission.
Well, I'm looking forward to today's discussion because it's with a longtime friend, Ed Scheuerman. I'm going to have Ed introduce himself in just a minute here. But Ed, I was trying to think about when we first met, and it would have been the mid-1990s.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I was serving in the field. You were as well, and we were both on an international team for the mission agency Pioneers. And Ed and his wife Carol have served for many years in Thailand and now at Lancaster Bible College. And we did a podcast a few weeks ago about biblical education with J.D. Payne. And following that podcast, Ed and I exchanged a few emails, and I just said, well, Ed, let's just get you on the podcast. We'll talk further about this issue because I do think there's a lot of change going on with missionary theological education and preparation for the field. And so I thought we'd have Ed come on. And Ed, if you could, your current role, how long you've been doing it at Lancaster, could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, sure, Ted. Thanks. First things first, here in Pennsylvania, they pronounce it Lancaster. So
Sorry. Lancaster.
I'd be in trouble if I didn't correct you on that one. But it's Lancaster Bible College, Capital Seminary and Graduate School. I'm now finishing up my 15th year, and I would say it's my final year as I'm getting ready to retire from here. After 23 years on the field with Pioneers and then 15 years here, my wife Carol and I are moving to a ministry to help people arrive well on the field and stay on the field well.
So you've been working in higher Christian ed for a long time, Ed. What do you see as the big trends generally?
I'll start generationally, actually. I'm talking about the students more than education first.
Okay.
And this is not new to you guys. You've had it on other broadcasts, but they're very much willing to go to the tough places if they have someone with them. And while I wouldn't call it hand-holding, they do want to know that they have some level of support, mentoring. I've often said at LBC that I value my teaching ministry as much as my mentoring ministry at LBC. My desk chair, my office, but the chair in my office is a sacred place. And so the students are there to listen, to learn. Now that I'm in my mid-60s, I often am told, Dr. Ed, I just want some of your wisdom. And what I'm hearing is, you're old. But they want to know from people who have been there and done that, what's it like? And they also want to know who's going to go with me when I do this. I'll go to the hard places as long as I'm not going alone and have that. So I think that's the biggest thing, because relationships are so important to those going to the field now. Now, with that, go ahead.
Let me just jump in quick. We interviewed a long time ago the leader of a ministry that does security training for mission agencies. And he made a comment that I thought lines up really well with what you're talking about. He said, 20 years ago, if you told a Gen Xer that they had to take security training before they could go to the field, they at least grumbled about it. And they might actually shop for a different mission agency because they didn't want to be held back or put through all these hoops. He said, nowadays, the missionary candidate calls the agency and says, do you offer security training? Because if you don't, I'm going to keep looking for a different agency.
Yeah.
And that's part of what you're talking about, right?
It is. And it's also speaks to the issue of risk taking. And while some of these people are growing up with helicopter parents and have not been encouraged to take risk, I think on the other side, they are willing to take risk if they are entrusted with how to do it responsibly.
Interesting. All right. Well, I jumped in and interrupted you. What were you going to say next?
Well, as I built my program here at LBC, it was largely in response to some of the research. Elliot Stephens, when he came up with the 3 different areas that contribute to attrition, or interpersonal skills, ministry competencies, and spiritual formation. And so they sometimes don't know how to get along with others. They don't know how to do the job that they're being asked to do. And then also they don't know how to care for their own soul. So when I came here and rebuilt the program and have revised it over the years, it's those three things that I've brought into focus. The fourth one I would say is mental health issues that come to bear. And yeah, again, as I built my program, it's with these things in mind. How do I help these students prepare to go to the field and to stay on the field? Outback Steakhouse's philosophy of hiring is we hire friendly people. Hey, we can train for skills. And I think a lot of what the skills that are needed for the field can be done by agencies or people on the field. It's those other softer skills that are more difficult and often neglected at higher levels of education.
Ed, I'm curious, what trends have you seen academically shifting? You've been there some time, as you mentioned. Has there been a shift in the curriculum and the theological, direction that schools go?
I can speak of my context. I can't speak, broadly as much as I would like to be able to. But I think and this is difficult because I'm getting ready to retire from LBC, but I want to sing its praises as well because we are one of a shrinking number of schools that remain committed to a Bible college, a Bible education. Mm-hmm. Everyone that graduates from LBC graduates with 2 majors, including biblical studies. And that's a requirement. I think it's 32 hours minimum to offer that. And there are fewer and fewer schools offering that. They're bringing down the Bible requirements in order to add more classes in other areas. And we have found that, our former president said, Bible is our middle name and we like our middle name. Mm-hmm. And so we are committed to that. And what I find right now, to answer your question, is that we're getting more students coming because of that distinctiveness. And they want the biblical worldview, but they don't just want a biblical worldview. They want the Bible. And if we're preparing people to go into church planting, for example, or whatever role it might be, here, there, or anywhere, they need to know what the Bible says. And I'm going to resist the urge of starting to preach right now. But I think that is probably one of the trends that I would say is that there are more and more schools pulling back from the commitment to a biblical education to the level that some of us still maintain.
So can I ask, when I look back at theological education history, and this is not my area of expertise at all, but there was this, in the 40s and 50s, 50s and 60s, let's say, there was this Bible Institute movement that happened.
I would say even back in the 30s is when it started, yeah.
Okay. And that was really, it wasn't highbrow. It was for, basic Bible education. Then many of those schools grew up, became universities, offering all sorts of degrees and other things. Are we just in a downturn on a phasing kind of a process, do you think? Or is this something bigger? Is this really a trend that's going to stick with us and be with us for the long term?
Yeah, I don't have that crystal ball, Ted, but what I do see happening is that it is very much a consumeristic mentality when it comes to college. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, well, what kind of job will my child get with this degree? And I've had that question asked many times in my office as they're considering an intercultural studies degree. And I want to say, and I've only had the courage to do it once, where I've asked, well, where's the Holy Spirit in this conversation? Because I'm hearing from your child a desire to go into ministry, but your concern is finances. And I think this, Ted, is the trend that they seek a college education as a means to a higher paying job and not necessarily as preparation for ministry. And when you had JD on recently, you're talking about he's absolutely right. Training people for pastorates rather than more general ministry.
Interesting.
Do you see that shift that JD talked about away from a robust missiology? I know you're only going to speak about your own context at Lancaster, but as you look at the landscape of theological education, do you see that movement away from a missiological framework as well?
I think I would say I would agree with that. As I watched that again And I went back actually to Matthew, what you did a long time ago about missiology and the church, and I went through that again. And I was struck by the thought of how are we allowing our ecclesiology to determine our missiology?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't it be the other way around, where our missiology informs our ecclesiology?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels to me that missions, and this is no news to anyone here, has become another small silo next to so many other silos in the church. And what I would say is that if we talk about the vertical silos in the church, there are 3 horizontal bars that come across all of them. One is worship, the other is facilities, and the third should be missions, that it cuts across all of them and not stands alone as a separate small silo.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that seems to be a long-standing and continuing trend.
So there's a couple schools that are maintaining numbers. The Dallas Theological Seminary comes to mind. They had a good, robust year this year, same numbers pretty much as the previous year, maybe even a little larger. Other schools, like Biola, they have folded their missions program into a school of theology. I understand your school has been pretty stable and steady. To what do you attribute that to? It seems to be going the opposite direction of the overall general trend.
This is going to sound very self-serving. I'm sorry, but it does come down.
They're coming for Ed. Is that it? They're coming to see you. They're coming to meet Ed.
It's very relational. It's very relational. And I when I talk about that, I also want to talk about the growing trend of people wanting to go online with their classes, and you just do not get the same experience online as you do in a classroom. And it's interesting. I had a student and his family who they served overseas. They were in my office a year ago, less than a year ago, and they said, "We heard John Piper say, don't choose a college based on the program, based it on the person who's going to be teaching your child. Dr. Ed, we're coming here because of you."
All right.
And I'm thinking there, I just am about to announce my retirement. But it still is true. I think a lot of it comes down to who is that person teaching your child. And if it is a job and not a ministry, I mean, think about it. When we teach at a school like LBC or some of these schools, you're not getting paid as much as you would somewhere else. I could go and teach cultural anthropology at a secular school and get paid a lot more, but this is my ministry. And I love my students. Just think about missing them and walking into a new ministry and saying goodbye to them is gut-wrenching for me. And I think that's what transfers into people wanting to come to a program like this.
Yeah. And the heavenly retirement plan for you is excellent, I understand.
Amen. That's right.
There's going to be a lot of fruit waiting. Yeah. You're looking for the dividends on the other side. That's
I'm
really
looking forward
great.
to that redeemed body, yes.
So I always say this, people mobilize people.
Amen.
People disciple people. I mean, you can have structures and programs and those things can all be helpful. But at the end of the day, when I think about my journey into missions, Ed, it was a person who mobilized me. It was someone who saw something in me, who called me out and brought me along. And so I'm really encouraged. I don't know if we have any educators online here, but maybe we do. Speak to them. Speak to those people who have in their sphere of influence, young believers, just about the importance of that role.
I will. And then but I do want to make sure we also get to the topic of the churches, because I feel like we need to touch that. But yes, please. Thanks for the opportunity. And you started it already, Matthew. The fringe benefits, the eternal benefits are so much more than the time putting in the hours of grading and curriculum revision and putting PowerPoints together. Some people love it. Some people don't. But when I finish the day and I think of that person who sat in my office and thought, I just helped that person move one step closer to God. I think about the angle scale often, and it's about how to find out where they are and how to help them move one step closer to God. Whether they're on the other side of conversion or this side of conversion, how can I hear their story and help them move one step closer to God? And to think that I've been able to do that for so many people for so many years, my philosophy, my ministry, my mission statement, if you will, is that I seek to glorify God by empowering others to do what God's called them to do. through the ministries of encouragement, exhortation, and equipping. What are you doing well that I can help you continue doing well? Exhorting, what do we need to talk about? Sin or strategy or something like that. And then equipping, what tools can I put in your hands? And so I get to do that at an institute of higher education where I am exposed to hundreds of students each year and to be able to have a role in what God's doing in their lives.
Let's talk about that topic of the church that you just brought up. What role does the church play in this chain of getting missionaries trained?
Yeah, and I think this is where the biggest gap in that previous podcast I felt was like, we need to hunker down here for a bit, because the problem, I'll back up a little bit. The president of LBC has been talking about the upcoming cliff of fewer graduating high school seniors going to college and the fewer numbers going into ministry. And every time I hear this, I think, okay, but how do we reverse that? Those are the symptoms. What's the disease? What do we have to do here? And I keep coming back to the local church. Yeah. Now, I'm an elder at our church. I served as an interim director of mobilization for a while. I have a passion for the church, but the church has to get its act together if any of this is going to continue. And there's going to be fewer and fewer people applying for ministry positions of any kind if the church starts to see itself as independent or not needing others outside of its own church, especially in the role of missions, especially in missions. And so, if it continues to be seen in the church that the role of missionary is something weird, then people are not going to grow up to even see it as an option. I'm thankful to be at a church where the Kidman director and the youth directors all have a heart for God's heart for the world. And a couple of years ago at our congregational meeting, I showed the military ad, Warfighter. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. You look up military ad, Warfighter, you'll see it's a 1-minute clip, and the parent is talking to her son who's in the field. Michael, why do you want to do this? I want to make an impact. Oh, you're going to be alone. I'm not going to be alone. I'm part of a team. And everyone stands up and he turns around and he says to Mom, Mom, what do you think? And the tagline says, their success tomorrow begins with your support today. And I showed that to our church and said, are you ready for these conversations? Because they're coming. And, you said it, Matthew, previously, if the senior pastor doesn't have missions as part of his DNA, it's not going to happen. And so how do we help the missions pastor to gather more of God's heart for the world? And so if that's not happening, certainly people are not going to be sent to schools for education and into the mission field, because being a missionary was going to be seen as weird.
Well, I don't know, Matthew, if it's kosher for me to bring this up or not, but you did research recently that showed an inverse relationship between seminary education and a heart for the nations among senior pastors. Did I get that right?
That's correct. And, we've got to probe in a little more and find out exactly what's behind it. But what it revealed is that those who go through seminary are not likely to emphasize missions if they end up in a pastorate, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was referenced in with JD's talking. Yeah. I think about that. I heard that and I wrestle with that. It makes me wonder which seminaries they're going to, and what can be done, because I know even at Capital Seminary here, the mission of God, the meta narrative is integral to the graduate studies as well as the undergraduate studies. And I think your study said that they're more likely to support local missions than global missions. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
So it's not an either or, but if one of them is being deficient, that's a problem.
Well, I can tell you, Ed, my alma mater is Fuller, and my sense is that they have deconstructed mission so much that it's lost any kind of real core meaning. And it's
think about the irony of that.
It is very ironic when you think about how many, it probably produced more PhDs and doctorates in missiology than anybody else. But they have moved definitely into the critical theory camp.
Because I do believe, Ted, that this is a theological issue, as God's heart for the world becomes one of his attributes that can be talked about in isolation from others, then this is a logical consequence of that. That missions becomes another thing to talk about, not the central thing to talk about.
Right.
I may have mentioned this in the previous podcast or a previous podcast, but there's a seminary, and I'll leave them unnamed at this point. But I talked to some leaders at an executive level, and I asked about their missiological studies, and they said it's marginal at best.
Yeah.
And the comment was, it doesn't bring students in. We're marketing to get students. And most of them are looking for, as you mentioned, career path, or they want to do church planting. And so they're focused on church growth. And he said, it doesn't bring in students. And so, that's unfortunate. And I said, well, okay, pragmatically, I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with it. But how can they graduate a theological institution where the main textbook is the scripture and have almost zero missiology? And he shrugged his shoulders. He was frustrated as well.
And I would agree. And my question is, how is it not, throughout all of the studies, it's not just, okay, take this class on missions. It shouldn't be, here's a class on missions. Missions should be part of the worldview of what's being taught.
Yeah.
Well, Ted talks about this, systematic theology has its advantages, but one of the downsides is that it has taken missions and it is disconnected from the meta narrative, as you mentioned. It becomes an optional course as opposed to, a thread that runs through all of them.
Yeah, as I was thinking about this, I was looking up those Great Commission quotes. You probably have seen them before. But a couple of the quotes that came up there, and I was just wanted to read these two. Ralph Winter once said, "The Bible is not the basis of missions. Missions is the basis of the Bible."
Yeah.
And Oswald Smith, any church that is not seriously involved in helping fulfill the Great Commission has forfeited its right to exist.
Amen.
I mean,
I
know I'm preaching to the choir here, but
with your heart and soul. So
let's shift gears a little bit, if we could. And Ed, talk to us a little bit about what you're looking forward to in the future. Maybe start by giving us a little overview of some of the research on receiving well upon which you're basing your future ministry.
So my wife, Carol, is a licensed counselor, and she has a lot of clients who have come from the field or on the field. And our experience on the field, again, we were 23 years in Southeast Asia, the last 12 of which were in Thailand, overseeing our teams from Vietnam to India initially. And so I was, what I like to say, or don't like to say, but to describe the role, is sort of like the vice principal at the high school. It's where all the problems came and all the issues to be dealt with. And so a lot of member care type stuff. And again, that helped to inform the curriculum that I put together here at LBC. But we still get people writing, and we hear so much about people coming to the field and not doing well. I've got 2 of our 4 daughters. One was in Thailand, the other one's preparing to go to Thailand right now, and we just see the need. The need's there. We just know about the resources, though, and so we see ourselves. Well, let me back up. We call our home Gilgal, based on the book of Joshua. When Joshua they go to battle, come back to Gilgal. Rest, get ready for the next battle. Go to the northern campaign, come back to Gilgal. And so we've always called our home Gilgal for about 35 years now. And we see our ministry in a similar way. How can we help people to catch their breath, get back to a healthy place, and then return to the battle that God's called them to? So that's pretty much where we're headed. The research, we're working again with pioneers. They've already asked. We knew that Carol would have a role with her counseling, but we weren't sure what my role would be. And it's growing more into focus. We're actually putting together a website to market ourselves to other agencies as well on the side, but primarily pioneers, helping people to stay on the field. It's those years from 2 to 7 when people struggle with longevity. And if they can make it past that 7-year gap, they have a greater chance. And what I want to see happen is there are some people who come to the field that have the goal of, I'm going to get kicked out of here for Jesus. Okay, that's not what we're looking for. There are others who, on the opposite end, I'm going to stay here as long as I can and never really do anything. We want people to stay and to thrive and to accomplish what God's called them to do.
That's great. What's the event that's coming up next year? I think you've already sold it out, if I'm not mistaken, but you're doing some kind of an event on this topic.
Yeah. And Carol's going to be attending. I will actually be teaching classes, so I won't be able to go. And so it's that whole concept of, the getting hundreds of leaders from Pioneers coming together in Europe to talk about this issue of helping people to receive and stay well on the field.
Yeah. And I actually see this with other agencies too right now.
Yeah.
There's
and then
an
afterwards, I
understanding
think there's going to be some training with peacemakers as well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Receiving how new people come on. This goes right in line with what you're saying about the younger generation wanting to know that they're part of something bigger, a bigger team.
Yeah.
And helping missionaries to receive well is part and parcel of that.
Well, Ed, how can people learn more about this new venture of yours? Do you have any ways they can
we have a
connect with
website. It's not yet launched, though.
Not launched.
It will be the GilgalJourney.com, I think, but it's not launched yet. Yeah, I think probably maybe through Missio Nexus we'll make it known so that you guys can put it out there for us when it's fully launched. But I've still got to keep it in.
Well, we are having a conversation about maybe in 2026 doing a U.S.-based event on the topic of how to receive well. So that's possibly in the future. So we'll see.
In the meantime, I'll continue to host your webinars, Ted.
Yes, Ed has been hosting our webinars now for a few years. And for the audience out there, as Ed moves into a role where he's traveling more, we're going to be looking for someone to step in with some very big shoes and help us hosting those webinars. So if you're interested in that, drop an email to me. Well, Ed, thanks for your time. And again, I just want to say, thanks for serving faithfully for such a long time.
Right back at you
with
guys.
so much more to look forward to still.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ed, I pray that this next phase of your journey is your most fruitful ever.
Thanks, Matthew.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Esler, president of Missio Nexus.